Welcome to the Write Good Books podcast, the audio companion to WriteGoodBooks.com, with your host, Jason Bougger.
Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Jason. I'm here with our co-host, Scott Michael Childers.
Hello.
Hey, Scott. You doing good?
I'm doing fine.
Excellent. Fan fiction. Is it useful for a beginning writer to write fan fiction? What do you think?
No. End of podcast.
End of podcast. See you next time.
No, I have some strong feelings about it. How do you feel about it, Jason?
You know, I think that if you're writing to be published, fan fiction is not the best approach to take. But if you're a new writer and you're trying to build your craft and just trying to learn how to tell stories, some people might really enjoy picking up an existing world that they're a fan of and writing some stories just to learn how to write.
All right. So my point of view on this, unless you are being specifically contracted to write about these characters, this setting, follow the plot by someone else's intellectual property, I feel that as a writer learning their craft, they should learn the whole craft, including world building, character building, plot points.
So you're saying you need to do all the hard stuff right away.
I'm saying that it's all part of what we do. For me, I think it's more useful to write that way as opposed to saying, today I'm going to write plot. And I'm going to use prefabricated characters. I'm going to use a prefab world. That means your writing, in my opinion, is going to be somewhat disjointed because you're going to be writing, here's the plot section, here's my character section. It needs to all be integrated. So while fan fiction might be a fun hobby, I believe if you're seriously looking to improve your writing, you need to improve all of your writing and not sectionalize it or break it down like that.
Yeah, you're right. All aspects are important. If you want to rely on the crutch of fan fiction, saying, well, I don't have to create a character, so I can tell a story with pre-existing characters, you do make a good point. So are there any pros to writing fan fiction? I still could say there are. You know, if you're younger and you just want to start writing, you're in the third grade. No, I shouldn't have said that. No, I'm really surprised at the amount of other writers I talk to who do write fan fiction. I was blown away the first time I ran into somebody in real life who said they write fan fiction. In fact, the question they asked me was, well, I write fan fiction. How would you recommend I go about writing my own fiction from scratch? And I was really surprised that someone asked me that because I had never known that there were actually people in real life who wrote fan fiction.
You mean people that you know?
Yes,
Okay.
That's what I mean by in real life. People down the street. So I can definitely see how much it could be fun. I mean, you know, sometimes you daydream about your favorite TV show. I mean, you're writing fan fiction in your head when you do that.
Well, and I can understand. There are people who are such great fans of insert property here. You know, many people who write their own stories based on Batman or Star Trek or Twilight or My Little Pony or Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, whatever it may be, because they are fans. And especially for properties that are no longer being distributed, this is their way of continuing those stories or whatever. And I can understand that.
Yeah, the fanboy in a person or fangirl.
Well, and wanting some sort of closure.
Yeah.
Especially in those that are cut down early in their run. I can understand that feeling. And if you're doing that for that reason, okay, just don't send it to me.
You don't want to do it to build your writing career.
Exactly. If you want it to build your writing skills and your career, you've got to be able to handle all the steps, all the parts of it. Fan fiction is just a small part. And maybe I'm jaded. Maybe it's because I've seen so many fan fictions that...
Why are you seeing all these fan fictions?
I don't know. I'm a magnet for it. But people will insert themselves into the story, or they'll change the characters to better fit their own point of view.
To interrupt you and still that thought, we should actually talk about when so-called original fiction is thinly veiled fan fiction. I think publishers can pick that out. If they think you're rewriting Star Trek The Next Generation and changing the names, that'll hurt your writing career, or that'll hurt your acceptance rate.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a whole other discussion we could have about reinterpreting well-known stories. That I feel that is different than fan fiction. And let me extrapolate a little bit.
Okay.
Fan fiction is taking the status quo as it has been presented and adding onto it. Reinterpretation of a known story. Let's say Red Riding Hood, a well-known story, but there are many different variations of that theme. And they're trying to say something new with it, oftentimes changing the characters and not pretending to be the same story.
You're coming dangerously close to defending Rob Zombie's Halloween remakes.
I wouldn't do that. I've never seen it, so I can't defend it. But again, I'm not saying reinterpretations are always good stories either. But a fan fiction for me, for my definition, is it's not changing or not having a point of view that's original. It's here's how the property was, and then I'm just going to tack this extra stuff on.
It's making new episodes to an existing series.
That's a great way of saying it. Whereas a reinterpretation is trying to present a different point of view, updating it. And I will admit, this is a very thin line between a reinterpretation and fan fiction.
And a lot of times, if you look at this expanded universe of Star Wars or Star Trek, they're done with license, but in a lot of ways, those are fan fiction.
Well, but in those cases, those have been contracted by the people who own the IP, and sometimes they're told, this is the direction we want to see something. And oftentimes they're not using the same characters as the main movies. Sometimes they are, but that's writing for an IP. That's a whole other branch of writing.
And I don't personally believe that writing fan fiction will get you a job doing that either. I think they look for established authors that they contract to write the story whoever owns the copyright has in mind.
And usually those stories are new stories.
Yes.
In one way, it's slicing it really thin and just saying, well, it's who's paying for it. In some people's minds, that might be the definition.
Anyhow, it all comes back to, if you want to build your writing career, fan fiction's probably not the way you're going to do that.
I don't consider it a very good writing exercise. If that's all you do, it definitely isn't. It's like when you're lifting weights and you always skip leg day. You're going to have chicken legs. You may be, really strong in the shoulders, but you can't support that weight because you got chicken legs because you always skipped leg day.
Right, you've got no foundation.
Right.
And maybe that's a big problem with fan fiction. It's you don't have your own foundation. You're using somebody else's.
Yeah. And then there's problems. Not all fan fiction is like this, I admit. But changing key characters to be not characteristic. So you take, say, a Star Trek episode, and you have Kirk being very quiet and docile. Because it fits your story, it doesn't fit the character of Captain Kirk. And again, if you're going to write that story, create your own characters so that way they are who you need them to be. You don't change a current character 180 degrees in their motivation and their actions because it fits the story. And that's a sign of really bad fan fiction that I've read. Oh my gosh.
So now 2 questions.
Yes, sir.
The first one is almost a yes or no question. We've been a little hard on fan fiction.
Yes, I'll admit I've been kind of hard.
Is there an unfair stigma against fan fiction writers? Are they legitimate writers?
Yeah, in many people's point of view, including mine, the label fan fiction has a stigma attached to it. There are probably some people who write fan fiction who are wonderful writers and write wonderful stories that fit the characters. But, like I said, don't make that your only writing exercise.
You might be an excellent writer, but in a lot of ways you might be wasting your talent if you're throwing it all into fan fiction.
Yeah, if you're an excellent writer, write an original story and get it out there, published or not.
And you know what? If you are an excellent writer who feels like you can't step outside of fan fiction, that you don't feel you're strong enough at world building or character development, look for a writing partner.
Yeah.
Look for, if you're a writer, I'm sure you know other writer friends, maybe collaborate on something. Go to your gaming crew, have them create a world for you. The GMs are a dime a dozen and they love creating worlds.
Well, you gotta be careful with that, because then you get into inside jokes that don't translate well outside of that group.
Very true.
But the idea is, If you're an excellent writer, why waste your time on someone else's property
Right.
that you're not getting paid to do?
Right. And when your chance of being published doing it is as close to zero as it can be.
Yeah. And this is disregarding, maybe there's a company that says, send us a sample with our characters.
Oh,
for
that's true. That's true.
That's a completely
That's
different
different.
thing. You're writing to get a job. In that
Right.
case.
If Marvel has an opening and they say send us an X-Men story, you write an X-Men story and send it to
Right,
them. So
right. That is-
I have no idea if that's how Marvel operates, by the way.
I don't know anymore. But yeah, that is different. You are writing to get that job.
Right.
To write intellectual property by the owners of that intellectual property. Different case.
Right. And then I said I had two questions. So the second one is, we've talked in the past off camera, me and you, about historical fiction. Is that in some ways a type of fan fiction, especially when you're using real people, hence existing characters?
Okay, you caught me. I haven't hid the fact that I write historical fiction. And yeah, we've talked about this before. What is the difference? Is it semantics? Like you said, this is a world that's prefab. These are characters that are prefab. I have struggled with this myself because I have a bias against fan fiction. I've said it at the beginning of this episode. Am I a hypocrite in writing historical fiction? For me, it's different exercise because in historical fiction, at least the way I approach it is, you are still creating a world. You are using keys from the real world, but a lot of people don't know what the streets of a small railroad town in 1914 are. There's not a shortcut for me when I do that. I have to describe the world. I have to describe certain historical figures. Some are well known.
Really, writing in the past is no different than writing in the present. You take the existing world and you still create original characters.
Right.
I mean, you might have some existing characters, but you're still building your story around characters that you create, more or less.
Right. And there's different flavors of historical fiction. Some add maybe a other point of view characters that aren't the main historical figures, and that's the story, and the history is going on around them.
Right. Forrest Gump.
That's pretty good. That's a pretty good example, yeah. Forrest Gump was not there in real life. History proceeded just as it always did, but his story was in a historical setting. And yeah, there are some interactions with historical figures, but it did not change the course of those historical figures' lives.
You'd even say that about the Indiana Jones movies.
You really could. And there's the whole thing about alternate history, which is a whole other episode as well, where you are changing history. But at that point, you are creating a new world because things have changed.
I think you make an important point. Historical fiction, you're not changing the future.
Right.
You're staying within the existing historical record for
Right.
the most part.
Those historical milestones still happen. Those historical figures still go about their lives.
And you're writing about characters with conflicts and storylines based on the setting of the past, where you're not really altering the past.
Right. And there is a bit of world building around that. It's like describing the house that these characters live in. And some of the historical record for some of these places don't exist.
Yeah.
So, and I can't use a shortcut, say Gotham City, the USS Enterprise. So that's where I stand. And who knows? Maybe someone has a different point of view and want to call me out on it.
And we'd love to hear your feedback. And on that note, I think we'll close out this episode. Thanks for listening. Visit us on the web at www.writegoodbooks.com. Check back next time.
See ya.